Good evening. We are now 10 days away from the general strike against the duopoly, against Congress, against politics as usual, against the status quo. Martin Luther King challenged us. He said that our only hope today was to recapture the revolutionary spirit and to go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal opposition to poverty, racism, and militarism. And with that powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo. Now, the American Union is willing to take up that powerful commitment and challenge his triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. And the way we can do it in 2022 is by unionizing as voters and demanding that Congress enact the Blueprint for a Better America, our crowdsourced legislative package that will end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. This legislative package is structured on our 5 constitutional duties. And so to remind us about our duties as Americans, I like to start these sessions off by reciting the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That is our mission statement as Americans. Those are our responsibilities, our duties, both individually and collectively. And as a union, we can work together to make sure that those things are done. Now, as I said, this legislative package is structured is based on those 5 duties. And last week we went through the for Title I to establish justice and looked at a lot of the criminal justice reform provisions, and Title II, ensuring domestic tranquility, the truce over the wedge issues of guns and abortion. And so today we're going to continue with Title III, provide for the common defense. Now, when the framers wrote the Constitution, the framers were very opposed to standing armies. They were not big fans. And yet today we've got the House recently passed a defense budget of $850 billion. We're spending prodigious amounts of money on the military-industrial complex and ignoring far too many problems here at home. So we're going to continue to look at some of the ways, we're going to look at the ways that the blueprint ends the endless wars. What are the concrete actions that it takes? Now, this is a legislative policy, and so there's only so much nuance you can put in a legislative package. But there are a number of policies that you can put in place and establish principles that will guide us going forward. And so tonight is de-escalation of nuclear proliferation. And section 321 is the findings and purpose. And so let me just go ahead and read those real quick. Congress finds that 1, the operational life of the Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles can be safely extended until at least 2040. 2, on the research, development, testing, and evaluation of the ground-based strategic deterrent program can be paused until 2032. And 3, the existing nuclear arsenal is capable of producing damage in excess of anything that reasonable, rational adults should want to inflict on other human beings. The purpose of this part is to lead by example on the world stage and avoid another nuclear arms race. Now, not long after this package was first published on January 1st, the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states, they issued a joint statement on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races. So I'd like to read a couple paragraphs from that. The People's Republic of China, the French Republic, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America consider the avoidance of war between nuclear weapon states and the reduction of strategic risks as our foremost responsibilities. We affirm that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. As nuclear use would have far-reaching consequences, we also affirm that nuclear weapons, for as long as they continue to exist, should serve defensive purposes, deter aggression, and prevent war. We believe strongly that the further spread of such weapons must be prevented. We reaffirm the importance of reaffirm the importance of addressing nuclear threats and emphasize the importance of preserving and complying with our bilateral and multilateral non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control agreements and commitments. We remain committed to our nuclear non-proliferation treaty obligations, including our Article 6 obligation, quote, to pursue negotiations in good faith on effective measures relating to the cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. These are great goals that the five of the 9 nuclear nations possessing nuclear weapons can agree on. This as a matter of principle. And so, yes, that's what we want to encourage. Now, since back in January, there have been geopolitical developments, and we're at a point with the Ukraine war where the chances of a nuclear weapon being used are perhaps greater than they have been in recent decades. Unfortunately, it kind of is what it is, that regardless of what happens or not, we need to keep this legislative package is about focusing on the goals and the principles to move us forward as a nation. And moving us forward as a nation requires demonstrating leadership on these shared goals that the 5 countries just shared. And so part of that is acknowledging that Russia and the United States have about 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And so by, we'll get into here, by the United States not starting a new arms race and at the same time reducing its nuclear stockpile, we can be an example and say, look, let's not do this. We don't need to do this. It's not good for anyone. As everybody agrees, nobody wins with a nuclear war. It cannot be won and must never be fought. Yeah, and so that's cessation of the nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament. Those are good goals. So there was a survey back about 2 years ago in October 2020 by the Federation of American Scientists, and 60% of the respondents said they would prefer other alternatives to this new missile that the United States is gonna develop, ranging from the responses range from refurbishing the Minuteman III missiles or scrapping nuclear weapons altogether. So a majority of people said, we don't want a new missile. And those results echo a 2019 voter survey. It's conducted by the Program for Public Consultation at the University of Maryland. And it asked if governments should phase out its fleet of land-based nuclear missiles. And 61%, it's again about 3/5 of voters, said yes. That was 53% Republican and 69% of Democrats. So that is sort of the overview of this section, and I think that concludes my concludes section 321. All right. Section 322. Now that we're through the fighting, let's get into the meat of this, and this is Minuteman III life extension. Now, our Minuteman III missiles have been around for a while, and their usefulness, if that's the correct term for a weapon of mass destruction, it can be extended even further. They don't need to be scrapped. The Air Force had studied these options for extending the life of the Minuteman III to 2075. And according to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, an Air Force official testified that one more Minuteman III extension is possible before a new missile is needed. So while we try and de-escalate world conflicts, while we try and advance these goals of not getting a new arms race and nuclear disarmament, let us continue to keep the missiles that we have and not build shiny new ones. Again, a lot of money goes to the military-industrial complex, and gosh, I love Dwight Eisenhower had a speech when he was president, something along the lines of, every weapon of war, how it takes food out of the mouth of children, and so on and so forth, because he recognized the trade-offs when we ignored our domestic priorities in favor of military ones, and the cost of that. So this goes also sort of to a larger question of what sort of nuclear defenses do we need? And we have what's called the nuclear triad. So we have our missiles, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that are in missile silos across the West. And then we've got nuclear missiles on subs and nuclear missiles on bombers. And William Perry, who was Secretary of Defense under Bill Clinton, he wrote an op-ed in 2016 about why it's safe to scrap America's ICBMs. And because the ICBMs are sitting ducks. Everybody knows where they're at. And so should we get into a big shooting war, those are going to be some of the first targets. And that's sort of their point. A lot of my testimony is kind of overlapping between all of these sections, but that's sort of the point of putting them out in the middle of nowhere, is so that the enemy, presumably Russia, will target their nuclear missiles into a place of low population density, so they won't have as many missiles to target at cities. There was a study I saw recently, I think it was Princeton, looking at what the casualties would be in just the first few hours of a theoretical nuclear war. And so they gamed this out and found casualties would be about 91.5 million, about a third of them deaths, and about 2/3 of them injuries. Nobody wins. Nobody wins with a nuclear war. So Section 322 would require that the lifespan of the Minuteman III be extended to 2040. And so this would Congress would direct the Secretary of Defense to incorporate new and necessary techniques that could be incorporated in future ground-based strategic deterrent program, and use non-destructive testing methods and technologies similar to the testing methods used by the Navy. So reducing destructive testing. So that's what Section 322 does. Again, rather than building shiny new missiles and starting a new arms race, let's maintain the ones that we have. Again, the Air Force has testified that they still have life left in them. So let's keep that going. When William Perry wrote that op-ed about why it's safe to scrap America's ICBMs, he concluded with the line, "There is only one way to win an arms race: refuse to run." The United States can refuse to run, can set an example to the rest of the world by not building shiny new missiles and instead just keeping the ones that we have now. We have more than enough. All right, moving on to Section 323. This is the prohibition on use of funds for ground-based strategic deterrent program. And this is a prohibition on the upgrade program. None of the funds authorized to be used from 2023 through 2032 may be obligated or expended for the ground-based strategic deterrent program or the W87-1 warhead modification program. And any funds authorized to be appropriated that are unobligated as of October 30th, 2022 may not be transferred or reprogrammed. So if the money's already budgeted, then they can't take it and spend it on something else. It just can't be spent. Northrop Grumman got a $13 billion contract to start building these things. Again, so many of these, so much money getting poured into the military industrial complex, while so many problems at home go ignored, right? We have water crises in many cities around the country. We have, as you know, tens of millions of Americans that are living in poverty. We have, terrible conditions in jails and prisons. We have so many things that could be addressed if we stop spending money on building shiny new missiles. So this is what we've got now. We've got hundreds of these intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they're kind of in the Midwest, like so Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Wyoming. And again, these are sitting ducks. Part of their purpose is there just to be a target. But this leads to a conundrum. And James E. Cartwright, who's a former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and had been commander of the Strategic Command, he teamed up with former Minuteman launch officer Bruce G. Blair to write a 2016 op-ed piece for the New York Times. And he concluded that scrapping the vulnerable land-based missile force would mean that any need for launching on warning disappears. Again, we've got all these missiles sitting here, and you think that there's something coming in that could take them out. You've got to immediately launch all your missiles to stop them from being destroyed. And so if there's any sort of false positive, any sort of error that signals incoming missiles, you've got to launch all yours real quick. And there's not really any room for error here. Nobody wins with a nuclear war. If you've seen the movie War Games, this is the scenario that they kind of game out, which is, look, well, if somebody's might be starting a nuclear war, then we've got to go all in right away, because we have these vulnerable land-based missiles. And so the better solution, I'm going to call it the better solution, the less bad solution, is to get rid of the land-based missile force and instead just focus on the other two legs of the triad, the subs and the bombers, because bombers can be moved around. They're not stuck in one place. Subs, the enemy's not even supposed to know where they are. And so they're maneuverable, they're not vulnerable, and they are much more of a deterrent than the vulnerable land-based missile force. So we don't need this leg of the triad, period, according to experts in this topic. So we don't need this, and we definitely don't need to build shiny new missiles and start a new arms race. But we also need to acknowledge that this does serve another purpose in those states of Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Wyoming. They serve a purpose of pushing money out from Washington into those rural economies, that by paying someone to drive to one of these silos and sit there, two someones, paying multiple someones to drive to these hundreds of silos and sit there just in case a key needs to be turned, and have people sitting there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Well, those people spend money in the local community. On their drive into work, they'll stop at the local restaurant, order some food to go. They contribute money to the local economy, and that's important. These local economies need outside money coming in so that they don't just wither away. And so we've got to recognize that if we want to scrap these missiles, that we've got to address that, and we've got to make sure that those communities still have money flowing in. And so that's why universal basic income, the American Union Jobs Program we're going to talk about next week, universal basic income will automatically push money out into all these communities so that it can replace the function that the military industrial complex is serving in so many congressional districts around the country. There's, some of these places like Montana where they have military bases and stuff too, but their spending makes up like a third of the regional economy. And so again, we can't, people who advocate for just downsizing the military and just stopping all that spending, you have to look at the bigger picture. What other problems is that going to cause? And so we've got to address these things together. Again, Dr. King identified these as interconnected evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. And so if we're going to deal with the militarism, we got to make sure we're addressing the poverty at the same time with universal basic income. All right, let me move on to section 324. And this is the reduction of the nuclear stockpile. Now, as I said, the United States and Russia have about 90% of the world's nuclear missiles. And although we have, so according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute yearbook for 2021, these guys keep track of all this kind of thing. They say that the United States has 5,500, about a third of them are deployed and ready to go. The rest are in storage, compared to Russia with about 6,200, about a quarter deployed, the rest in storage. And the rest of the world, that's, if you're doing the math, that's 11,750 between those two countries. And the rest of the world has about 1,400 nuclear weapons in various stages of deployed and ready to go. So most of ours aren't even ready to go, but we do have that stockpile. And so this section would require a reduction of the nuclear stockpile by 50%. And so there's an administrator, and they would be required to develop a plan for reducing by half the number of total warheads that were reported in 2022 and implementing that plan no later than December 31st, 2027. And so, yes, we would cut our nuclear stockpile in half. Again, two-thirds of our nuclear warheads are just sitting in storage right now. So we can make a good faith effort. We can, if you get into a nuclear war, they're not going to do you any good at all whatsoever because they're sitting in storage. So we can be an example. We can say, not only are we going to refuse to run in the arms race because nobody wins, but we're going to de-escalate by half the amount of nuclear weapons that we have stockpiled. Now, think about that message that sentence. First, it does not send the message that the United States is undefended, because we still have, what's a third of 5,100? Call it 1,750 nuclear weapons deployed by ready to go by that, according to those numbers. So we have plenty of missiles ready to go. But what it sends the message is of, look, we're not going to escalate. We want to de-escalate. We, America, can try and be the calmer heads that prevail on the world stage, and and send a message that this is not the way forward for humanity. Couple other things as far as let's see, also according to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Pentagon actually concluded in 2013 that U.S. deterrent objectives could be met with unilateral reductions of up to 1/3 of the deployed arsenal. So that 1,700 number could be reduced by 1/3. And I forget who it was. There was another military officer that had similarly testified or written an op-ed saying that 1,000 nuclear weapons was enough to provide sufficient deterrence. Again, how many tens of thousands of people lost their lives from one bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and from each bomb at those two places. And our weapons today are far, far more powerful. Okay, so we still would have 1,000 of them to be launched, should be a sufficient deterrent for anyone and everyone. 1,700 is more than enough. Again, this legislative package does not require that the number of deployed nuclear weapons be reduced, only that the total stockpile be cut in half by the end of 2027. But it is a first step. It's a way to lead by example and improve our moral standing in the world. So in a sense, this is kind of codifying what we're already doing, right? Which is we don't have these weapons deployed. So let's just not just leave them in storage, but actually deconstruct them. And you could argue, I will argue, that as the only country to ever use atomic bombs on civilians, we have a moral responsibility to go first, to move us even further away from the brink of nuclear war. There's this science fiction book I remember reading called The Coming by Joe Haldeman. And there's an international crisis. And at the end of it, it ends with a nuclear agreement between these nuclear powers that no country will have more weapons than any other country. And so everybody can have the same amount, but nobody can have more. And so you've got a slow de-escalation, a race to the bottom, if you will, where the United States, like we said, there's 1,400. The other 7 nuclear states that have nuclear weapons have about 1,400. So call it 200 apiece. So the United States and Russia would immediately de-escalate to 200 weapons apiece. And maybe everybody would stay there, or maybe one of these countries would, drop down a few, and then everybody else would follow suit. And you'd just slowly de-escalate and eliminate nuclear weapons. No country would have more than anyone else. It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how it would work in reality, but there are ways. And one of the ways that we can end the nuclear arms race is by respecting international law. The United Nations recently, last year, I believe, they have a convention, a treaty outlawing nuclear weapons. And last year, the 50th country ratified it. And so under the United Nations Charter, this has been ratified and made nuclear weapons a violation of international law. Now, obviously, none of the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons are signatories to this convention. But there's a pretty clear message from the rest of the world that this isn't a game that we should be playing. And so, again, as the only country to ever use atomic weapons on civilian populations, we, the United States, can accept responsibility for that and move forward first in making a big step towards de-escalation. Again, global tensions are at a high right now. We've got nuclear treaties, disarmament treaties with Russia that are set to expire in the not too distant future. And because diplomatic relations are so terrible, the odds of them being extended, renewed, are low. But you don't necessarily have to have a binding agreement with someone else in order to do the right thing. You can just do the right thing because it's the right thing. And so the blueprint will codify this. The blueprint will require that we cut our nuclear stockpile by 50%. It is not unilaterally disarming. It is leading by example. So I think that's about all I have to say on nuclear weapons. And so we are counting down in 10 days to the general strike against the duopoly. The general strike is a hard haul. It's avoid working, avoid shopping and spending money, and observe a 24-hour fast. Now, as you might know, as my own personal commitment to this effort, to the Fast for Peace, I am observing a 21-day fast. I'm in the home stretch. It has been more than 11 days since the last time that I ate, and I've got 10 more days to go. I'm feeling pretty good. Got outside today, walked around for a while. And my weight was actually up a little bit. I was at 183 today, up from 101 yesterday. I was a little underhydrated, I guess. So doing well, feeling good, and I'm going to continue because this is a fast of moral pressure. We the people of the United States have the ability to de-escalate the midterms. We can refuse to fight. You know, just what was that the conclusion about the arms race? The only way to win an arms race is to refuse to run. Well, the only way to defeat partisan politics is to refuse to fight. And so the American Union is about being conscientious objectors to partisan politics and saying, look, instead of fighting over it, instead of trying adversarial democracy, which is having a lot of serious negative consequences for our society, we can switch over to a collaborative democracy where we work together to craft solutions and leverage our votes in order to force Congress to act. That's the goal. And so I hope you'll join us in 10 days for the general strike, and join us again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. where we'll talk, we'll take questions about anything that anybody has so far, and talk about creating a culture of peace. Thanks. Have a good evening.